So, I've been working on a video about vampires throughout history and literary genres and wanted to put it out by the end of October because Halloween. But then I didn't. Then I thought, oh, it's okay, I can finish it in November. But then I didn't. So now it's December, beginning of it as of the moment I'm writing this script. Lord knows when I'll put this out. And I've just been trying to exist. One of the ways I was doing so is by rewatching Disney's Tangled over and over and over and over again. And over again. Disney movies are, for probably nostalgic reason, very rewatchable, and I remembered how I had a similar situation a couple of months ago with The Sleeping Beauty. And as I opened my folder where I keep all my video projects, I noticed one about this particular movie. I can't remember why I stopped working on this video, so here I am, trying to be better at not leaving creative projects rotting in a limbo called starting something but then forgetting about it, by talking about The Sleeping Beauty. Because I want to. And I think we have to reevaluate it. Aurora is often forgotten when thinking of Disney princesses, and I can't blame anyone. She's hardly in the movie. During the climax of it, she's literally sleeping. Kind of a power move, not gonna lie. Aurora is also called one of the worst Disney princesses, and that influences the way the whole of Sleeping Beauty is viewed, because the main character is incredibly passive. She does nothing, but everything happens to her. And these reviews are not new, as we will see they have been the main criticism since the publication of the movie. Even though I agree that Sleeping Beauty is not the most riveting or unique story, I think we misjudged it on some occasions, as with a lot of early Disney movies and its princesses. Don't get me wrong, I'm not here to defend Disney because no, but I would like to reevaluate The Sleeping Beauty and see whether we can shift our perspectives a bit and dig a little deeper to hopefully understand the story and its origins better.
It's always a challenge bringing a great story classic to the screen, giving visual form to characters and places that have only existed in the imagination. But it's the kind of challenge we enjoy.
Disney adapting fairy tales is nothing new. In fact, the success of their studio started with it, with the first full-length animated movie, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which retells the classical fairy tale of the Snow White. Disney continued its reimaginings with another successful adaptation of Cinderella. Later, during the Disney Renaissance era, we will see the likes of The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast entering the Hall of Fame, but for now, let's get back to post-Cinderella time when Walt Disney wanted to adapt another fairy tale. But this time, he wanted to do it differently. The tale he had in mind was Charles Perrault's 1697 fairy tale called The Sleeping Beauty in the Woods. This is not the first of the Sleeping Beauty fairy tales throughout history, but is one of the most remembered ones, and the one that we can recognize the most due to Disney's adaptation of it. We will talk about the plot of both Perrault's version and other ones later, but for now the important thing is what I previously mentioned about Walt Disney wanting to have a different feel to the movie compared to other ones. He wanted to set apart the art style specifically, to have it have, I quote, the feel of
moving illustration.
The movie cost $6 million to make and became a box office flop with earning $5 million on its release. So Disney wanting to recreate Cinderella's success did not happen. But what he managed to achieve was creating one of the most artistically acclaimed features, a true moving illustration, and a huge thanks needs to go to one of the artists who set apart the movie with its unique art style. Ivan Earle. Ivan Earle was an American artist who was most known for his contribution to background illustration in Disney's earlier animated movies, most notable one being The Sleeping Beauty. To come back to Walt Disney's wish of having an artistically different movie, Ivan Earle was assigned to do all backgrounds for the movie. He was influenced by a variety of styles, one of the most notable ones being the French illuminated manuscript, the Traditions du Duc de Berry, an opulent book of hours. He also used the same colors, such as blue, purple, and green, that were used in the manuscript in the movie, which definitely gives the animation a fantastical feeling.
I first started with the old medieval artists and almost everything that was Gothic. The tapestries were perfect examples of how foregrounds ought to be. The Gothic came from the Persians, and all their little details of grasses and weeds and trees fit perfectly. So I realized I could use anything that was in harmony with what I was striving to accomplish. And over all of that, a little tiny bit of myself came through.
The Sleeping Beauty art style was also used as a blueprint in later Disney movies, such as Frozen. Usually in animation, the background is kept simple to draw the viewer's eye to the forefront where the characters are, to make them stand out more. That is not something that is the case for The Sleeping Beauty, as Ivan's background illustrations were very complex for just a background, and despite its artistic quality, many of the film's animators felt that his style was not suitable for the art form. Apparently, Sleeping Beauty was the first animated film whose artistic direction was determined by background paintings, which was not exactly liked by many of the animators. As I said, the problem being that with having very detailed and busy backgrounds, it was much harder to make the characters stand out among them. But as we all came to see, it is not the plot that we remember the Sleeping Beauty by, but its aesthetic. However, let's get into the plot to see what was so uninspiring about it to its viewers, and see if we can change our perception on some of the plot points. Okay, so what's the story about again? Once upon a time, there was a kingdom where a princess was born. People from all over the world came to rejoice, including 3 fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. Each of them gives the princess a gift. Flora gives the gift of beauty, Fauna the gift of song, and right before the last fairy, our queen, Maleficent, walks in, cursing the princess to prick her finger on a spindle once she turns 16 and die. Merryweather then adapts the curse to be Aurora falling to sleep until the true love's kiss. The fairies then take the princess, rename her to Briar Rose, and raise her until her 16th birthday, when it's time for her to return back to the castle so that Maleficent can find her. Aurora in the meantime meets a hot guy in the forest, so I guess she would choose a man instead of a bear in that hypothetical scenario. But Aurora must leave the forest, and upon returning to the castle, does indeed get found by Maleficent, who enchants her to prick her finger and fall asleep. The 3 fairies then put the whole kingdom to sleep, and yeah, remember that hot dude? Turns out he's the prince who Aurora was betrothed to before this whole fiasco, and got kidnapped by Maleficent, so the fairies first go to rescue him, and together they all defeat Maleficent, who turns into an epic dragon during the final battle, mind you. Aurora awakens with the true love's kiss, the kingdom yet again rejoices, and our 2 lovebirds dance until the end of time, while Aurora's dress goes from pink to blue. Which, before I start talking about the plot, can I ask why is Aurora marketed mostly in the pink version of this dress? Because if you look at which version was worn more in the original movie, it's the blue one. That's all I wanted to say. So yeah, that's the Sleeping Beauty, the Disney version. As I mentioned, this was an adaptation of Charles Perrault's story, The Sleeping Beauty in the Woods, and if I went over that story, you would see it's pretty similar. The first part, that is. The original fairy tale is not actually original, as the story of a maiden who is in an enchanted sleep is literally a tale as old as time, and is also incredibly messed up. But we won't go there in full, rather we will focus on the French tale. In Perrault's version, in the first part, the Sleeping Beauty is asleep for 100 years, which is alluded to in the Disney remake when Maleficent kidnaps Prince Philip and tells him she will release him after 100 years. In the fairy tale, after those 100 years pass, a prince learns about a beauty stuck in eternal sleep, and upon seeing her, he falls in love with her and she just awakens like that, making this version actually the least sexual of them all. Because if you know anything about the Sleeping Beauty tale, then you might know that in earlier versions of the folk tale, the prince assaults the princess while she is still unconscious, and she also gives birth to 2 kids while asleep. Now, the second part that Disney did not adapt expands on the story by telling us the prince's mother is an ogress, who wants to eat the Sleeping Beauty and her children, but in the end dies herself after the cook who she commanded to kill the Sleeping Beauty and the kids tricks her into not eating them. And I guess they all live happily ever after all that. So yeah, as with every story Disney adapts, they prettified it. I mean, in the original Cinderella tale, one of the sisters cuts off her toes to fit her foot into the glass slipper. And as we all know, in the original Little Mermaid tale, the mermaid dies and turns into sea foam. But these were not the only changes done to Sleeping Beauty. As with any story you encounter, whether on paper or screen, they all go through drafts. When adapting older tales, one way to make them appealing to new audiences is by making the characters relatable. Snow White was made to be a representation of that time's society and its struggles. Similarly, Aurora was given a different personality style, I quote, a freshness and a modern sensibility to make her more appealing to the audiences. One big difference from the previous 2 fairy tale adaptations, Snow White and Cinderella, was that the character of the prince became more prominent. Prince Florian, yeah, that's the Snow White prince's name, and Prince Charming are minimal figures in the storyline because the company was not sure in producing a realistic male figure.
The servant girl? This Cinderella? I have to go. Go? But you're about to be married! But the talking mice say she's the wrong girl. Son?
But in the creation of Sleeping Beauty, Walt Disney felt more confident in expanding the prince character and giving him a personality. How much of that personality we actually got is debatable, but still, there was a difference which we later see improved in the likes of The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, where the princes arguably have the more important character development in the movies. Moreover, the role of the 3 fairies was expanded to be more integral to the story. In the fairy tale, there are 8 fairies, whose number is reduced in the Disney version, including Maleficent, who becomes a more active villain than her crone counterpart in the original tale. Lastly, one of the great criticisms of the movie is Aurora's passivity, seen for example in the fact that she, a protagonist, never has a face-to-face with the main antagonist. That was not the case in the early drafts of the story, but Walt ultimately felt that the, I quote, eerie haunting presentation of a victim powerless in the hands of evil would be the stronger statement for the film. Speaking of criticisms, the film was met with mixed reviews. The main parts that are critiqued are the slow pacing and little to no character development, specifically of the main character, Aurora. Disney received criticisms for both her and Cinderella, and the reviews discussed the princesses of that era as naive and malleable characters. Although there is definitely a discussion to be had over the problem of a lack of character development and self-actualization of princesses in the narrative of Disney movies, we won't go into that in this video, but I will try to focus on this problem through a different lens. Both Cinderella and Snow White are the main characters in their own stories. But can we say the same for Aurora? Is she really the main character in Sleeping Beauty? I would argue not. If we look at what the internet says about who a protagonist is, the most common sentiment is that a protagonist is a character who drives the action and overall storyline. They are central to the plot and conflict, and are usually the emotional heart of the narrative. Based on these requirements, Aurora kindish only fits one criteria, and that is the centrality to the plotline. But only if we look loosely at that, because things do happen around her and to her. She is the titular character, everybody either wants her alive or dead, and maybe therefore she could also be considered the emotional heart, but she's definitely not the driving force of the story. In fact, she's hardly in it. Out of the 85-minute runtime, Aurora is on screen for 18 minutes, and for its climax, she's asleep. Once she wakes up, she doesn't utter a single word, meaning she speaks her final line of dialogue halfway through the movie.
I can't believe it! No!
It is much more clear now why people would have trouble with such a protagonist, especially with all the discourse over silent female characters that contribute nothing to the story. But I think this argument falls flat when we actually examine the story. Because this is still a women's story, only we're looking at the wrong character. Lee Butler of Tor.com defended the character writing, stating that Aurora's cipher-ness in Sleeping Beauty would be infuriating if she were the only female character in it, but the presence of the fairies and Maleficent allow her to be what she is without it being a subconscious statement on what all women are. Who in the story creates the conflict? Who creates a solution? Who has a battle with the main antagonist that they ultimately defeat and restore the world? It's the fairies. The fairies are the main character. And if we observe the story from that angle, suddenly it becomes a quite interesting story. The three fairies are definitely not the usual protagonist we see nowadays. It's not fully true that they change throughout the narrative, but that doesn't always have to be the case with the protagonists. In this movie's case, the fairies serve more as the driving force behind the plot. They're first introduced when giving Aurora the gifts, and once Maleficent curses her, they're the ones to come up with the plan on how to keep the child safe. They initiate what will later become the conflict and ultimately deal with it. But the fairies are not devoid of any development whatsoever. Their constant bickering with each other, as well as their incompetence while doing everyday tasks without the use of their magic, humanizes them and reveals their flawed and imperfect beings. They learn from their mistakes, which is seen when they decide to go and rescue Prince Philip, despite being scared of Maleficent, which we learn of in the beginning of the story when, instead of dealing with her, they choose to hide. The three fairies would, in a typical hero's journey type of a story, be the archetype of a wise mentor. But they play a far greater role. In fact, they are the ones who defeat Maleficent at the end of the story, not Prince Philip. From the moment they free him, they are the ones to fight with Maleficent's guards, and ultimately Flora enchants the sword she gave Philip with accuracy, so it pierces the dragon and kills it. And even though it is not the most important one, all three of the fairies do have a joint character arc of learning how to be better protectors. They are the ones who, besides Maleficent, have the most characterization done, making them the most relatable and realistic characters in the story. Some reviewers have tried to state that Prince Philip is the protagonist because he plays a more active role in the movie. We see this trend re-emerging in the likes of Beauty and the Beast, for example, where Beast's character arc is far greater than Belle's, but that is not the case for Sleeping Beauty. Despite his sword wielding, Philip goes through no external or internal change. We're also throughout the whole movie following what the fairies are doing, because once again, they are the driving force of all main plot points. Yes, Aurora as a character barely talks, but that's because everything is voiced through the character of the three older ladies, and they do serve as better points of view. They're magical beings who literally put a whole kingdom to sleep and battle Maleficent, who is the most powerful creature in this world.
Fools! Idiots! Imbeciles!
Basically, all four powerful creatures in this story are older women. making this a quite unique story. What further makes the story unique, besides the fact that the whole movie is actually about a power struggle between these four magical beings, is the fact that the three fairies are not your typical protagonists. Their types of characters are usually relegated to supporting roles, but they were the shining stars here. As said in a Collider article, Sleeping Beauty may be named after Aurora, but this is Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather's story. As for the not a lot happens in the story criticism, it is true, but then again, this is a retelling of a fairy tale. They are differently constructed than the typical three-structure act stories, and I personally think that a fairy tale structure fits both the narrative and the aesthetic of the story better. I still wish to say that I do agree with the criticisms on some level, because a lot of things could have been done better, and it took me a long time before I was able to reframe the story in my head. But honestly, it doesn't have to be perfect. When I think of Sleeping Beauty, I'm not thinking about character arcs or the pacing. I remember the gorgeous backgrounds, whimsical soundtrack, interesting choices of adult humor, and of course the most iconic Disney villain. It is still not anywhere near my favorite Disney movie, but I can appreciate the level of creativity and hard work that went into this animated feature, and I wish to see more artistically unique animations in the future like this one. So Disney, for the life of me, no more live action adaptations. Please. What else did I want to say? Oh yeah, did anyone have that Sleeping Beauty plug-and-play console growing up? It had 3 games on it, and god, I loved them all. I think I remembered the scenes from the movie throughout my childhood solely because of that game. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry it took me so long to make a new one, but it is what it is, and since it's the new year, I hope it provides us all with good things, and as my grandma would say, I wish all of us much luck and health. Let me know what you think of this movie, and would you consider rewatching it to see if you feel differently about it now? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!